Are you trying to break free from a toxic relationship that is consuming your life? It's been on off for a matter of months or years, and you feel like you're on a roller coaster of stress and anxiety, and you're just struggling to move on. You just can't do it. In this video, I'm going to unpack why it's so hard to walk away from an attachment perspective to give you an understanding of what's actually going on subconsciously for you. And I'm also going to unpack what you're making this relationship mean about yourself and how that's contributing to the difficulty of the situation. And then we're going to look at how to finally cut the cord of a toxic relationship and what kind of healing modalities do work and what kind of modalities don't work. And make sure you stick around to the very end, because I'm going to show you what to do so that your trust and abandonment issues you may have don't affect your future relationships. And if you're new here, welcome. My name is Amy, and I help women who are stuck in patterns of self-abandonment that keep attracting them toxic relationships to heal their trauma and learn the discipline of self-love so they can embody their true, authentic self in relationship. And if you'd like more content on this topic, please click the subscribe button and hit the bell notification so you get notified of new lessons every week. Before I get started, Heal Your Heart School is open for enrollment, so if you'd like more information about how to apply for that, stick around till the end of this lesson. So let's look at firstly why it is so difficult to leave a toxic relationship. And firstly, let's define what I mean by unhealthy or toxic. This is where there is this on-off dynamic, right? There's a real instability to the foundation of the relationship and you're not getting your needs met, but they keep hooking you in. You might be trying to push them away. You might have already tried to break it off with them several times, but there's this kind of hook and this lure that lures you back in, and you just can't build trust with this person. There might be compulsive lying, manipulation, gaslighting. They might have cheated on you. You just can't trust them, but there's something really sticky and addictive about this person. And you yourself find that you can't be yourself, right? You actually can't express your needs safely. They don't provide a safe, healthy space for communication to happen. They might shut you down or minimize things. And you notice that you've got to walk on eggshells quite a lot. And what you're actually getting from them is more like breadcrumbs than an actual cake, right? You just feel like you're getting little bits here and there, just enough to keep you hooked in, just enough to keep you going. Like I said, this kind of a bond is really sticky, and you might have heard of the term trauma bond before, and I have a video on that I'd like you to watch next, because if you notice that you are really getting hooked in, there's this really kind of hugely strong bond between the two of you. Bonds like this are really hard to end. They feel very sticky. You keep getting hooked in, like I've already mentioned, and there's a part of you that's justifying the continuation of this bond. You are focusing on the good in them. There's a part of you that knows how bad it is, but the part of you that focuses on how good it is what gets you to stay. And it's almost like you go into scarcity where you feel like this person is the only one that's going to be able to love you in the way you do. And you might be looking back on the first couple of months of the relationship and how good it was and really clinging to that part of it. So if that's going on in this bond, this origin story you created at the start might have been created by an excessive amount of love bombing, which is really like too much affection, too much talk of things like marriage and kids and how much they love you, but they don't actually know you. It's an inappropriate amount of affection and attention early on. That might have contributed to how you've kind of created this bond in your mind, and it might feel like it was a fairy tale back then, and you might feel like this person is a soulmate or a twin flame. You might be using words like that it's meant to be, and so you've got to kind of like try and stick it out through all these bad times. But always in toxic or unhealthy relationships, the behavior does not continue, the good behavior at the start, right? There is always a definite switch from this kind of beautiful honeymoon bubble to then reality sinks in. And what's actually going on is, you know, you're not getting the actual picture of this person earlier on. They're putting on a bit of a mask. And of course, masks come off eventually, and that's why there's that big shift to seeing this kind of other side of them. Now, there's a part of you that knows this isn't right, that you need to walk away, but this part that sticks and stays can make us feel quite shameful about ourselves, because it might feel like we're a bit addicted to this person. And we see other people, they can walk away easily. There's not this kind of mechanism going on that really pulls you to that person, and I'm going to unpack what that is in a minute, but let's just focus on the fact that you're probably feeling like there's two parts to you internally. There's this part of you that knows how toxic this situation is. You've got to leave. There's no future here. There's no healthy trust and communication and foundation at all. But then there's this other part that just feels like you've got to stay connected to him, that you can't, ultimately end it because of all the four things that I've mentioned. And this internal split is actually a sign of a trauma bond. So I want you to make sure you check that video out and really recognize those two internal parts of you, because when I've experienced this in the past, I've actually spent days in one part and days in the other part. It's been such a significantly, divisive internal reality for me, and I can kind of get swept up in that fantasy reality that I've created for myself in bonding with him, and then flick towards the, oh my gosh, this is awful, I hate this situation, I have to get away. And it can feel like I just have a split personality and it sends me crazy. So let's explain what's actually going on so that you don't think you're actually going crazy, because you're not. What's actually going on is we've got some wiring in our attachment mechanism that is a little bit dysfunctional, and it's been created for a reason, and we now need to learn how to rewire it, which I will unpack at the end. So our attachment blueprint and the way that we attach, the way we love, and the way we deal with relationships gets formed in our earliest relationships with our caregivers when we were really young. This sets us up for a dynamic like this. If there was any kind of abandonment that happened early on in your family of origin, such as a divorce or a parent being really distracted by work, or it can be a really small, insignificant type of trauma where you just don't feel fully seen, heard, or understood by a parent because maybe they had other things going on. Or it can be a capital T trauma where there is a divorce or something significant. Either way, it was not safe for you as a child to be yourself, to show up as yourself and receive that connection and love by just being yourself. So you had to adapt and find ways to get the connection and love and safety from your caregivers in this dysfunctional dynamic. And what you did was you learned how to bond through the trauma that was going on. So let's just acknowledge the fact that trauma has quite a wide definition now. It's defined as any kind of circumstance in which you don't have the capacity to deal with it. So any kind of situation that you weren't prepared for. And when you're young, when you're a child, there are a lot of things that we don't have the capacity to process. So you were learning how to bond with your caregiver, even though they were the origin of your trauma. And so that's really in a nutshell of what trauma bonding is. You bond to someone despite the presence of trauma in that connection. And the nature of the trauma bond is to keep you safe in an unsafe environment. And you actually learn then that relationships have this kind of tinge of anxiety and uncertainty to them in your childhood, and you bring that through into your adulthood if you have an insecure attachment. And you might notice that you have a tendency to be drawn to unsafe relationships in adulthood if you had unsafe relationships in your childhood that you had to bond to. Now, the actual mechanism going on in a trauma bond is that you're bonding to your caregiver by projecting on a fantasy onto them that allows you then to feel safe in that connection. And it also allows you to minimize or discard any of the traumatic behaviors or any of the disruptive behaviors or any of the red flags your parents had, so that you can feel bonded and connected to them. And in order to do that and maintain that bond, you as a child needed to learn how to minimize and push down your needs and your preferences and any boundaries. You probably didn't learn any boundaries at all because there was no space for you to start to express and really be an individual self. So these two dynamics we're learning as children actually represent the internal split I mentioned earlier. So the part of you that's fantasy bonding to your parent in order to feel safe and to self-soothe and to regulate is actually the part of you that is craving your ex and craving that connection because they are currently your attachment figure. And then the part of you that you've suppressed, the needs and the boundaries and the things that you knew were not right as a child, and you maybe tried to express them but you were pushed down and ignored, they're the things that you're pushing down and ignoring right now in order to keep this bond alive. So what this mechanism actually does is it creates a projection of the person in our mind. And this is really the definition of insecure attachment, when we're not able to bond with the reality of the person in front of us because we've learned to bond with this projected fantasy in the past. So we have to get really clear on internally the difference between the fantasy person that we think we're bonding with or that we think we've been in relationship with, and the actual person behind the fantasy that we've projected. And when it comes to toxic relationships, there's so much of that fantasy at the beginning. You know, there's really that whirlwind romance, and there's, like I mentioned, all that love bombing and all that beautiful honeymoon feelings, and that's what's keeping us connected to them and keeping this connection alive. We've got to acknowledge and grieve the fact that a lot of that was actually fantasy. Some of it was true, no doubt, but a lot of it is fantasy. And we've got to really embed in the fact that the reality of this person and acknowledge all of the things that they're doing that are not compatible with us, that are incredibly unhealthy. Now, you might be saying, well, that's really difficult to do. Like, I already know all this, but there's this part in me that's really still deeply drawn to them. And that's because we've wired in some beliefs from our childhood about what we deserve. And we've insecurely attached to this person because there's a deep part of us that feels we don't actually deserve anything better. We don't deserve something that's healthy and available to us. Now, the bottom line is that love shouldn't be something we have to work for or prove ourselves that we're worthy for, right? This is a worthiness wound that's happening deep in our body where we don't feel worthy enough. And also our nervous system is wired to experience love as, you know, chaotic and anxiety producing and uncertain and intermittent, because that was the original bond that we had with our caregivers when we were children. So our nervous system is actually, our baseline is way off a nice healthy, stable ground. And because our nervous system is wired in this way, if you've ever connected with a healthy person in your past, you might have felt quite bored by them, or you know, you might have found yourself actually creating little dramas here and there just to feel that feeling of love. That feeling of love is just the anxiety producing chemicals that you're used to experiencing from your childhood, and you're trying to get it created in your adult relationships with a healthy person who just doesn't go for dynamics like that at all, because those dynamics are incredibly unhealthy. So we've got some deep mechanisms that are working against us from moving on, but the core mechanism I want you to learn about today that is really keeping this bond in place, and this gives us the clue as to how to completely cut the cord, is your abandonment wound. And this is the deepest part of you that felt really abandoned by your original primary caregivers when you were young, and when, you know, you were triggered by them. And it's from this place that your fantasy of them is being driven. This place is where you feel out of control in your need to be in contact with them, where you feel addicted to them and you do anything to get them back. This place is where we can heal from. And you might notice that their presence and their contact with you keeps kind of triggering you again and again, triggering this wound. And if you get a chance to have a few days of no contact with them, or a week, you might start to feel better. It's because this wound is getting a chance to actually finally heal. But as soon as they contact you, it just rips the band-aid off the wound, and you feel raw and exposed, and the turmoil starts again. So what we need to do is give this wound some time and space and really allow it to rest, rather than being constantly triggered by the presence of memories or of your ex. And we'll unpack that in a minute, but I just want you to know that the abandonment wound is the origin of all of these attachment difficulties. And if you want to know more about your abandonment wound, what it is, how to heal it, I want you to watch this video next. So let's look at what we make this mean about ourselves, because we are meaning-making machines, and really diving into the identity piece around trauma bonding, your abandonment wound, gives us a lot of clues about how we can actually heal and move on and embody our true authentic self. So firstly, you've created some significantly false beliefs about yourself because of the origin story of your abandonment wound. That's how your self-identity has been formed up until now, and that's what's making it really difficult to move on and attract healthy relationships. And these false beliefs are really around the themes of we don't feel deserving of real, authentic, healthy love, or that love should be something we have to work for or prove ourselves to be worthy of, because right now we don't feel worthy enough, right? We don't feel justified enough to have that healthy relationship. And we also feel that love should be chaotic and painful. Like, that's just the way it is. Love is hard. And like I said, we find that healthy, stable love really understimulating, because we've just been wired for this chaotic love. And we're deeply attracted to these types of toxic and unhealthy relationships because they actually reinforce the self-beliefs and the self-identity that's been going on. And underneath this kind of cognitive understanding of our identity in the context of the traumatic relationships we've always had through our life, we actually have biological effects of this as well, and this is called the trauma mind and the trauma body. So when someone becomes our world and we do everything in our power to, make them happy and to suppress our needs and preferences and to really walk on eggshells and make sure everything's fine, our brain is actually getting rewired, right? We're being reactivated in old trauma all the time, and it makes it difficult to distinguish between this person and the rest of the world, right? We see the world through these really narrow goggles. They become our world. And this becomes a filter that we see the world through the trauma mind of. And you might notice that if someone asks you to do something, or if there's an opportunity, you constantly think, oh my gosh, what will they think? Will it be okay? Will it not be okay? Because your trauma mind is being activated by this relationship. And the pain that they've caused us and all the problems that have happened, we actually start to project that onto the world around us. We start to learn that the world doesn't feel safe because our trauma mind is telling us so, right? So we actually have these embedded trust issues when we have a history of unhealthy relationships, that people can't be trusted, and thinking that if you open yourself up, there's going to be danger. And of course, these are all things that we learned when we were young, right? We weren't able to open ourselves up fully to our primary caregivers if they didn't have the capacity to do so. So in our trauma bonding, we learned that it wasn't safe to actually truly be ourselves. And our nervous system is wired for this as well. We are used to feeling this cocktail of hormones and chemicals that keep us on the roller coaster of, does he like me? He doesn't like me. Oh, he loves me. And we actually get really addicted to the dopamine and the oxytocin, and that intermittent reinforcement actually makes this person more addictive to us. And this is something, again, that our body's been wired for in early childhood, in relationships where there wasn't enough available love for us. If love was scarce, we learned to place increased importance on those tiny little breadcrumbs of love from our primary caregivers. And so we're used to getting scrappy with love and feeling like we've always got to grasp, we've always got to try and get it, and that there's just not enough of it available for us. So now that we've got those kind of frameworks in place, I want to unpack how to actually move on. And a big piece of it is to reclaim your identity, because right now, after a toxic relationship, or many of them, you might be feeling a bit like you've lost yourself, or you just don't feel like you're really living fully. And there's this really big kind of hole in your life that the toxic relationship has been filling, and it hasn't really been that satisfying, but it's just taken up so much of your internal world that you have lost yourself. So healing and moving on is about your self-identity and rewiring that. So it takes a conscious mentality to shift. You need to make the choice to choose to love them, which you are entitled to do, and let go. We can both love someone and let them go at the same time, because Loving someone does not take away your free will. It does not take away your sovereignty as an individual. It is not like this disability that you have and it means that you have to, look after them and always make sure that their needs are being met. You are allowed to move on and you are allowed to still feel feelings of love for them. So you don't need to feel like you've got to fully let that go. And starting to honor and recognize that separation of love and what you feel or felt for them and your conscious choices now, which are actually acts of self-love. You're making the choice to invest in yourself and really embed in yourself that you and your mental health and your happiness are more important than the feelings that you have for your ex. Now, if you find this concept of self-love and self-discipline around really choosing yourself difficult, I have a guide that gives you the exact steps to healing self-abandonment and learning the discipline of self-love. You can go ahead and click the link in the description below at the end of this video to download it. It has a 60-day self-love guide that will help you get started on the discipline of this practice of choosing yourself. Now let's dive into the types of healing that allow us to actually effectively cut this cord, and also what kinds of healing might not work and why they don't work. So firstly, some mainstream therapies like talk therapy, journaling, reading about it, writing about it, might just tell you, oh, look, you just need to move on. You've just got to let go. And right, when you actually go into a talk therapy session, you might notice that you're talking about it so much and you're actually reliving it and re-triggering yourself and kind of wallowing in it, making the problem bigger inside of you. And sometimes this can be really counterintuitive to actually healing, as does journaling, as does any kind of talking or reading or thinking about it or hanging out on all the narcissistic channels on YouTube. It can actually make the problem much, much bigger inside of your body. The reason these don't work, or they only work to a degree, is the actual wounding happened in our body, in our nervous system. It left an energetic imprint in there, and no amount of talking about it, thinking about it, reading about it, watching about it from the top down is actually going to heal something that lives and is alive in your body. And that's why often if you spend a lot of time and energy in talk therapy or a lot of journaling, you might notice that you're just keeping it alive and you're in yourself, and it just gets bigger and bigger and more present. That's because what you're doing isn't actually healing it at the root of the issue. Okay, so you can spend all the time and energy in understanding it cognitively and doing all this work, but then you find yourself back into another toxic relationship and you're like, oh, I did so much work. I thought that I had healed this. It's because you actually haven't addressed it from the energetic standpoint and the frozen trauma that's lying in your body and lying in your nervous system. And that's where we come to this concept of bottom-up healing. And this is what I teach inside Heal Your Heart School, and I want to teach you about today in this video, because this is the kind of healing that you actually need to be focused on if you want to work through these issues. Now, we need to learn the language of the trauma that is frozen in our body, that's been in there since we were very young, that's been re-triggered every time we've had an unhealthy relationship in our life. We've actually got to open up the box and look at what's going on in there. That does not mean we need to relive the memories of our traumatic childhood. We don't have to go through the stories. All we need to do is look at the energy and how it's manifesting now in our body, how it's affecting us and our patterns in our relationships presently. And I love this word cord cutting. There's a lot of this kind of showing you how to use the energy of your body to simply cut the cord. But it's just the same analogy as if you were trying to get a weed out of the ground. If you just chop the weed off at the ground, the whole root system still is in there, and you know that weed is just gonna go right on through and grow again. It's the same thing with this kind of energetic cord cutting. You might try to cut it off, but you notice that thing in you is still there, and that's the root of the abandonment wound. So it's not as simple as just energetically cutting off from them and doing any kind of that body work that allows you to do that. You actually need to go into the wound and recognize what is coming up for that part of you. And that part of you is no doubt a very young, very scared, very sad, upset, distressed part of you. And you've probably been pushing it down and ignoring it, because if you were to open up and really acknowledge it, it would cause you short-term pain and distress to listen to what it's saying. And some of you might know this as your inner child, inner children, inner parts, if you've done IFS work. the reality is we have many, many different parts inside of us, but whatever part is presenting to you at this moment in time, you need to expand your window of tolerance to allow yourself to feel those deep, deep feelings of grief that part of us desperately needs us to feel. We actually haven't allowed ourselves to grieve what we didn't get in all of our toxic relationships, right? What trauma and stress we went through, and we certainly haven't grieved what happened in our childhood and the things that we didn't get and the parts of us that were repressed and suppressed and told were wrong. So this part of us needs to now feel fully seen, fully heard, fully understood by you. All of those things you needed in your childhood that you didn't get, we now need to give that to ourselves. And this is a process I call reparenting. This is a type of inner child work, but it's not just a matter of giving yourself affirmations and telling yourself you love yourself. This is actually an integrated relationship you're creating with these younger parts of you that are causing your patterns to recur again and again. So these parts of you are frozen in time in your body, and that's what it keeps you attracted to the dynamics that you love, like that anxiety producing, emotionally unavailable, dark, mysterious guy, right, over the healthy, secure, boring, stable guy. It's that part from you, from your body, that wants that feeling to be triggered again. So every time the trauma has occurred in your relationships and in your family of origin, this frozen part inside of you has been re-triggered again and again. And I've used the word abandonment wound previously, and that's a word we use to describe frozen trauma. So we actually need to reconnect to this part, and often we don't because we don't want to hear what it has to say. It's often got a very painful, unpleasant story to tell. It's got a lot of self-judgment, self-criticism, but you might notice that it's pushing through anyway. You might have a strong inner critic where you do have actually quite a naturally critical filter within yourself, right? You're really hard on yourself, you pull yourself down, and you just have low self-esteem because of this inner part that is still pushing through. So a process of reparenting to get you started now. Let's quickly do a little scenario. So just go along with me. I want you to picture a difficult moment in your most recent toxic, unhealthy relationship, just something that you can actually look back on and relive now without causing yourself too much distress. And just picture that scenario in your mind. And I want you to picture yourself as a 3-year-old girl on the receiving end of that scenario with your ex, experiencing that, living that. All right, so it's not you there, but it's her. You as an adult are walking into the scenario, and you're going to walk up to her and you're going to gather her in your arms, and you're going to say to her, I'm here for you. I'm sorry. I have got you now. You're safe now. I will never leave you. I love you. I'm here for you. And I want you to notice if, as I say that, you feel any sensations in your body. That tingling, or perhaps you might feel like you want to cry, you've got a lump in your throat. They are all sensations from the body that are a result of the frozen trauma in you being kind of touched by my explanation of how I do reparenting with my own child. And as I said that, I felt them myself in my body as well. And we start to shift and change the energy in the body, and it starts to get a chance to feel heard, seen, understood, and loved. So we're effectively massaging out that frozen trauma in the body so it defrosts, and you can start to feel alive in parts again. But I want you to know that it's really important to make sure you do this kind of work so that it doesn't affect your future relationships, because like I said, mainstream help that only gets you to talk about it and understand about it cognitively and doesn't actually work at the level of the body, you are going to go out and keep repeating the same patterns again and again. You need to reconnect or connect to these parts for the first time, and to start to work with them so that the cycle will not continue, because your trauma mind and your trauma body are kind of working as an adaptation because this frozen trauma in your body exists, and it will continue to seek toxic dynamics in your relationships if you don't actually work with it. And the worst part is if you do start to date or attract healthy, potentially healthy partners, you'll probably be either turned off them or they'll be turned off you, because you've still got this worrying and this need for unhealthy, anxious activation that is a part of your, trauma body that you've been used to your whole life. So If you want to know the exact 3-step process that I teach my clients in Heal Your Heart School to go through this process of actually clearing and healing this frozen trauma in your body, I have a free webinar. It goes for 1 hour. It's on the 3 steps to self-love after a toxic relationship ends, and it's actually an in-depth exercise in there that's a version of what I quickly told you today. You can click the link below and attend that in your own time. I also have a Facebook group. I would love to see you in there because I'm in there weekly. I do lives. And if you'd like to submit your application for Heal Your Heart School, there is a link to my calendar in the description below. And please comment below if you have any questions. I'd love to see you in the comments. If you have any future content you'd like to see on this channel, I really appreciate my audience and community when they engage with me in the comments. Click the like button on this channel because that will help me out a lot in the algorithm. And here are some next step videos for you to watch so that you can move one step closer to having an incredibly authentic, real relationship with yourself so you can show up and embody your true self in relationships. And for now, I will see you in the next video.